Thank you all for being here. I want to thank my friend, Senator Katie Britt, for co-sponsoring this legislation and for being here today. And I also want to thank the co-lead on this bill, Senator Gillibrand, and my colleagues who have already co-sponsored this legislation, Senator Schmidt, Senator Welch, and Senator Klobuchar. And I especially want to thank Elizabeth Phillips for joining us. The story of her brother, Trey, her initiative, and her bravery are the reason we are hosting this press conference today. I want to begin by sharing Trey Carl's story. Trey was a young man who loved the Lord, and he loved his family. He loved his friends, and he proudly resided in my home state of Texas. As a young boy, he attended a summer camp in Branson, Missouri, where he and dozens of other campers tragically were sexually assaulted by the camp director. As an adult, Trey sought accountability. He filed a lawsuit against the camp in an effort to hold the camp responsible and to seek justice, not only for himself, but for others. But instead of justice, Trey was offered a settlement. And that settlement came with a non-disclosure agreement, which mandated Trey's silence. After years of fighting to recover from abuse, Trey's settlement reminded him that his voice could be bought, that his story could be buried, that the price of compensation was silence. Trey once told his therapist, "They will always control me, and I'll never be free." Not long after, Trey died by suicide. He was only 28 years old. No child who has endured sexual abuse should be forced to carry that horror in silence. No child should be forced to walk alone in that pain. And no child should be forced to accept agreements that protect their abusers. In Trey's case, and in many others, non-disclosure agreements are used to shield the abusers. Children are the most vulnerable and precious members of our society. As legislators, as parents, and as human beings, we have a moral obligation to stand between them and those who would harm them. That's why today we're introducing Trey's Law. Trey's Law will protect, defend, and support children who are the victims of sexual assault. It ensures that non-disclosure agreements cannot be used to silence minors who have endured abuse. At the same time, the bill preserves the confidentiality of settlement amounts and allows victims themselves to insist on privacy if they so choose. It gives the victims the power. What it does not allow is the forced silencing of victims in order to protect the abusers. Trey's Law establishes a clear national baseline. No NDA may be used to silence the disclosure of child sexual abuse. And importantly, this legislation does not prevent states from going further. Versions of Trey's Law have already passed in Texas, in Alabama, in Missouri, Tennessee, California, and other states have taken steps to prohibit the use of NDAs in cases of child sex abuse. These are meaningful steps in the right direction. But we owe it to Trey and every other victim to ensure that they have a right to speak about their experiences. They have a right to rely on those around them and that they know their stories will not be silenced. And most importantly, that they're not alone. Today we stand here to say no child should be defined by enforced silence, and that no survivor should feel controlled or defeated by the system that is supposed to deliver them justice. Thank you again for being here. And with that, I invite Senator Britt to share some remarks.
Senator Cruz, thank you for your leadership once again. We have seen you tackle things in this Congress, giving a voice to the voiceless, letting the unseen be seen, from the Take It Down law to this, making sure that the most vulnerable have a partner. And I appreciate yours and Senator Gillibrand's leadership in making this happen. The story that you're willing to share is making such an incredible impact for so many people across the country. I want to say thank you. Your brother's story is gut-wrenching. It is tragic. And worst of all, it was preventable. Going through trauma as severe as sexual abuse and grooming a child is unimaginable. For all of you that are parents out there or who have a niece or a nephew, this is unthinkable. Being put into a situation where a victim, though, is then essentially forced into silence takes the trauma to an entirely new level. Silence should always be a choice, but never be mandated. I want you all to imagine going through something as severe as Trey, and then being too afraid to talk about it, even to your therapist, because of the confines that you believed had been placed on you by the people who were actually supposed to protect you. Anyone trying to silence survivors of these heinous crimes through contractual agreements, litigation, or otherwise is pure evil. I have long said that I intended to serve in the Senate to be a voice for the voiceless, to help the unseen be seen, to make sure that our most vulnerable have recourses on the actions that have been placed upon them. And that is why I am proud to stand next to Senator Cruz today as a co-sponsor of this piece of legislation. This will honor Trey's memory, but it will also prevent other tragedies like this from occurring again. And as lawmakers and as parents, we have a duty to do everything possible to ensure that that is the case. This is a common sense law that every single person in this building should be able to get behind. We should be able to introduce this piece of legislation today and literally get it through the United States Senate with no questions asked. I want to thank those states who have already stepped up to lead, Texas, Missouri, the others that Senator Cruz mentioned, but in particular, Alabama. I have State Representative David Faulkner with me and State Senator Matt Woods pushing this legislation on the state level, helping build the grassroots that we need to get this across the finish line. Look, I want us to get this done to honor your brother and to protect children all across the country. If we cannot pass this law quickly, I'm not sure what in the world we're even doing here. So thank you for sharing your brother's story. Thank you for being willing to take an unimaginable tragedy and make others' lives better. And thank you for protecting people who don't even know they need it yet and making sure that justice is truly served.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite the founder of Trey's Law and Trey's sister, Elizabeth Phillips, to share some words.
Thank you very much, Senator Cruz and Senator Britt. Your advocacy on behalf of countless survivors, many in the room today who traveled in from states across the U.S., are feeling seen and heard by the comments you just made. As a Texan, I want to thank you, in particular, Senator Cruz. Texans look out for each other, and this is a huge step forward, and it means the world to me. And since Trey doesn't have a voice, I'm going to try to be his. I'm from Dallas, Texas. My name's Elizabeth Phillips, and I'm here because of my late brother, Trey Carl, the namesake of the law being introduced to U.S. Congress today, a major milestone. My brother was a talented and beloved young man, a National Merit Scholar and a brain researcher with a bright future. But from the age of 7 to 17, Trey was groomed and abused by a serial sex offender named Pete Newman, a summer camp director at Kanakuk Ministries based in Southwest Missouri. While Trey saw his perpetrator sentenced to 3 life terms in 2010, he sought civil recourse to hold others involved accountable. That settlement ended with a restrictive NDA, which has become a standard practice in personal injury law. And we are declaring today that that is no longer acceptable in this country. NDAs were created to protect trade secrets, not trauma secrets. They have since been misused to intimidate victims and in any other circumstance would be rightfully called a bribe, your voice in exchange for restitution. Trey survived horrific child sexual abuse and what we now believe was also trafficking. On top of that, the NDA requested and pushed specifically by Kanakuk was so restrictive that Trey was scared to share his trauma even in therapeutic settings. How do you heal when you don't have a voice? Because he was coerced into silence, I have learned more about my brother's abuse and his death than I ever knew in his life. And that's tragedy upon tragedy. He died by suicide, as Senator Cruz mentioned. That was in 2019, and he was 28. But just before he died, he told a therapist, "They will always control me, and I'll never be free." He was literally silenced to his grave, and it is no exaggeration for me to claim this as a matter of life and death. Trey's law is about public safety, protecting kids, and preserving the voices of victims after their innocence has already been taken. Since Trey's law passed in states like Texas and Missouri, on the governor's desk in Alabama, thanks to Representative Faulkner and our Senate sponsor there, the floodgates have opened. We've heard from countless survivors of sexual abuse across the country who were contractually muzzled by NDAs and civil settlement agreements. Thanks to many of you here today advocating in state houses across the country, we are proud that versions of Trey's law have now been passed in 5 states and filed in 9 more jurisdictions. However, a victim's freedom to speak should not be determined by where they live or the zip code in which they were abused. That's why this act must be codified as federal law. Without Trey's law, NDAs will continue to be weaponized against child sexual abuse and trafficking survivors. This form of lawful hush money only protects bad actors, and that's contrary to the public interest. But this evil, as you've named it, Senator Britt, can end with us, and it should. Trey's law ensures that any clause or agreement intended to conceal the details of childhood sexual abuse is void and unenforceable as a matter of public policy. It tells survivors that they matter more than a bad actor's reputation or a liable institution's precious profits. Today, we are standing with you, survivors, to say you deserve to own your own story. You deserve to heal and to be able to speak out to protect others, because I know all you want is for this to just not happen to another child. Every voice of truth matters. Transparency matters. There's a quote that says, "Shame dies when stories are told in safe places." Should this Congress pass Trey's law, and they should with urgency, we will have transformed the legal landscape of this country into a safer place for our children, for survivors to heal, and for the lives and deaths of victims like Trey to matter. Let's break the cycle of codifying shame-induced silence that predators rely on. Let's choose to act upon victims' cries for justice and restore their freedom of speech, their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I stand with the many survivors here today. You are brave and courageous, and you didn't deserve what happened to you or the system's failures. We can right this wrong, and we must close this harmful legal loophole. Together we will. It's time to set truth free. No more suffering in the shadows. Thank you for remembering Trey and deciding to act on Trey's law so that his life and legacy matters. I'm now going to ask Catherine Robb of the Children's Justice Campaign to say a few words as a national subject matter expert.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Senators. My name is Catherine Robb. I am the National Director of the Children's Justice Campaign. I'm a little bit taller, of the Children's Justice Campaign of Enough Abuse. Thank you, Senator. I would just like to share a couple of statistics. Research is very clear. 1 in 8 children will be sexually assaulted before their 18th birthday. If that's not an epidemic, I don't know what is. Every child is in harm's way. Most children who are sexually assaulted, as high as 92%, know or their parents know and trust the abuser. Every child is in harm's way. Children from every religion, every race, every culture, every political background. This is not confined to one community or one demographic. It is, by objective standards, a public health crisis. A critical solution to this epidemic is the passage of Trey's Law. Legislation designed to ensure that secrecy can no longer be weaponized to protect perpetrators and bad acting institutions. Secrets enforce silence. They do not just bury the past, but they endanger the future of our children. Survivors are silenced as children by fear and grooming, by power imbalances, by threats, and by the simple fact that they are children. I speak to survivors all over the country and all over the world weekly. What I hear consistently is this: I just don't want this to happen to another child. That is the core purpose, that is the moral center of Trey's Law. Trey's Law gives force to that hope by so many survivors. Silence protects abusers, transparency protects our children. Let's protect our children and pass Trey's Law. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd now like to recognize Jaden Harris and invite her to share her story.
Good morning. First, I want to thank these co-sponsors for their leadership and in filing Trey's Law at the federal level. My name is Jaden Harris. I'm 19 years old, and I'm here today not just as a child sexual abuse survivor from Branson, Missouri, but as someone whose voice was protected by Trey's Law. It's why I can be here today. When I came forward about the abuse I experienced, I was prepared for it to be difficult. What I wasn't prepared for was the intimidation, not only from my abuser, but from my own lawyer to sign a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for restitution during a mediation process. I was alone when it came to fighting for my voice. It was both my abuser and my lawyer that tried to require me to sign an NDA, a contractual clause that would have restricted my ability to speak about the details of what happened to me for the rest of my life. Imagine being told you can never tell your own truth. Despite the bullying from my attorney and all those involved in the case, in my heart I knew I had to stand for truth. Not just for myself, but for others who feel they have been silenced. I'm standing here today with my voice because Trey's law protected it as a matter of public policy, and I was able to achieve settlement while preserving my ability to speak out in hope of protecting others. Due to learning about Trey's law in Missouri, I knew something important. I cannot be legally forced into silence. No agreement could take away my right to speak about my own experience and those responsible for the abuse. That legal right changed everything. It shifted the balance in power. It meant that any resolution would not come at the cost of me owning my story. Not only is having a voice essential to my healing journey, but it is also how I can warn others. My abuser is still out in public every day. He goes by the name Reza. He is a well-known entertainer in Branson who still has a magic show, and I'm concerned about ongoing victimization. The criminal justice system has done nothing to remove him from being around children. So I'm going to do something. I'm speaking out today, and I'm advocating the law that protected me to protect victims everywhere. Federal action on Trey's law is critical. A survivor's freedom of speech should not depend on geography. I am fortunate that Trey's law had passed in Missouri and allowed me to keep my voice. But someone's zip code should not determine whether they can tell the truth and warn the public about predators. This needs to be national. Trey's law is straightforward but powerful. It makes non-disclosure agreements in cases of child sexual abuse void and unenforceable. It ensures that secrecy cannot be purchased when a child has been harmed. It affirms that survivors can be seen, heard, and believed, and that's in the best interest of public safety. What almost happened to me, signing away my voice, should never be an option in this country. I am grateful to be part of today's important milestone in making that happen and setting truth free. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaden. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your voice. Elizabeth, thank you. Thank you for telling Trey's story to the world. Thank you for fighting. And Catherine, thank you for your leadership every day. No child should face this horror. And no child should be silenced if they go through this hell. With that, let's open it up to questions.
On the Take It Down Act, you had some different competing versions and concerns that took a while to get it through. Are you aware of any concerns or opposition to this? And if not, do you think this is the kind of thing that could be done in days or weeks, or how do you see this?
Look, I'm hopeful we will move swiftly. We have right now 6 sponsors of this bill. It is bipartisan, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. I don't think this is an issue that should be partisan at all. And so I don't know. I have not had any senators turn me down joining this. The 6 who are together are 6 who I've worked with repeatedly on other matters. And so they are folks I naturally reached out to and asked if they would join me. I think we will see widespread interest in supporting this law, and I'm not aware of any opposition. And so we will work to move this forward and move it forward swiftly. And my hope is that it passes the Senate, goes to the House, passes the House, and I look forward to our being at the White House when it's signed into law. And it's interesting, his question about the Take It Down Act. I remember standing at a press conference that in some ways felt an awful lot like this one for the Take It Down Act and for girls that had been victimized by deep fakes that had been sent to their high school classmates, and that was not a crime. And their victimizers faced no consequences. And we stood at this press conference and said, we're going to pass the Take It Down Act. And as you noted, it took some time, but we got it through the Senate, we got it through the House, and I will tell you, having been in the Rose Garden for the signing, it was a beautiful moment, and I'm looking forward to our being there again. Actually, as it so happens, I believe that is the only bill in history that was signed by the First Lady of the United States, in that after President Trump signed it, he handed it to Melania, and she signed it. And my team asked, well, wait, does that imperil the legality of it? It's like, no, once the president signs it, it's law. Like anyone else can add their signature. All right, anybody else?
I have a question for Elizabeth. Was there any opposition from a stateside perspective that you saw?
We did not have any public testimony opposed to Trey's law in the states where we got this passed. And I hope that's the case at the federal level as well. In fact, we had some suspected opposition testify in favor of Trey's law to end the misuse of NDAs in civil settlements because this is about children. And as Senator Cruz said, this should be bipartisan, this should pass swiftly, and there should be no opposition. But you'll let us know if there is.
Oh, yeah.
What pops up.
Yeah, look, I think this bill is common sense, and it's why you're seeing states moving on it. It's why I think you see a wide bipartisan coalition in the Senate, is that it is common sense, and, you know, many of us are parents. I have 2 teenage daughters at home, and the frequency with which every 9 minutes another child is victimized. And I think all of us have an obligation to do everything we can to fight that.
We'll do one more if anyone has one.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll see you later today. Thank you.
No, look, you're telling your story. And